Marc Ó Cathasaigh on Party Glass.
Some years ago, as I was spending time on Ilon Clare off the coast of West Cork, I saw a great summer thunderstorm sweeping in off the ocean, and as it gobbled up Fastnet Rock, the windows and the doors across the island were being pulled to and made secure, and livestock were huddling into what shelter they could find, and everybody prepared as best they could for the storm to make landfall. I get the same sense here today at County Corla as we await the surge. Our healthcare workers are the lighthouse keepers who are already feeling the brunt of that storm at worst to come. We must offer them here today both our gratitude and also every last support the state can give them to help them weather this crisis. Meanwhile, here on the island, we must make the best preparations we can. I wish again to commend Minister Doherty and her department officials who have put together a sweeping range of measures. As the Minister acknowledged, they are not perfect, but they are very good considering the timeframe in which they were constructed. The pandemic unemployment payment is providing some measure of comfort to people who have lost their jobs owing to the outbreak. Likewise, the temporary wage subsidy scheme is allowing businesses to retain employees in the anticipation of better days ahead. However, as is understandably the case with measures so quickly designed in reaction to an unprecedented crisis, there are gaps in the provision and areas where people have fallen between the cracks. To give the Minister and her officials their due, they have in most cases reacted quickly to the shortfalls of the scheme and have given the concerns raised by opposition spokespersons a fair hearing when we have been given the chance to have input. Still, there remains areas of shortfall within the scheme and cohorts whose needs still have to be met. I hope the Department will remain flexible in addressing those in need. I've had many representations, like my colleague in Sinn Féin, from people who fall outside the range of the pandemic unemployment payment, be that apprentices under 18 or older citizens who might be supplementing their pension provisions with part-time work. While I accept the principle of a working age payment and why those age limits might apply, that's cold comfort to those excluded, be they 17 or 70, and I hope that the Department can find a way of helping these people in the weeks ahead. Likewise, there are many in our community who may find it difficult to demonstrate a loss of income. Mothers returning from periods of unpaid maternity leave, for example, or members of our arts communities who may work from project to project, commission to commission, gig to gig. There are workers in low-hour contracts who make the bulk of their income in overtime, who now find themselves reduced to 70% of their minimum contracted hours under the temporary wage subsidy scheme, which represents a serious loss of income. In County Corla, there are others too who may continue to be unemployed but may wish to self-isolate or cocoon themselves. People who have contacted me have underlying conditions that make them especially vulnerable to COVID-19, be that asthma, diabetes or heart condition, or are living with elderly or infirm relatives, and they are terrified of the consequences of contracting the virus, and they must be supported in their decision to step out temporarily from the workforce. I welcome the extension of the COVID payment to these citizens, but I note it's only payable for a 2-week period. At County Corla, I believe that this should be extended in cases where the person in question can certify their vulnerability to the infection. I also strongly recommend that the Government provide certainty to people hoping to avail of this payment, that their employer will allow for them to take this leave and that their job will be there for them when they decide to come back. In fact, I think there is a job of work to be done to protect all employees still at work in this time, and indeed to protect the state from spurious claims on the public purse. While the overwhelming response of people in Ireland to the COVID outbreak has been one of social solidarity, there will always be some unscrupulous people who will spot an opportunity in a crisis. At County Corla, I have heard whispers, as have many others here I am sure, of employers who have sought to introduce rationalisation measures during this period, laying off higher paid employees while retaining younger staff on the temporary wage subsidy scheme. I have heard too of companies hoping to leverage the 70% wage subsidy scheme to secure cheap labour while keeping their doors open for business. This is, I am sure, a tiny minority, but I would urge the Minister to put in place structures that would allow employees to report any abuse of the provisions put in place during this period of uncertainty. And at County Corla, I must emphasise again, as I did 2 weeks ago in this chamber, the needs of some of our more marginalised communities. We are hearing reports of illness establishing a foothold in our traveller community and in our direct provision centres. We must begin to provide these people with in these settings the opportunity to effectively self-isolate in order to stem the spread of the virus in what are often crowded settings. I would include our prison population and those in emergency accommodation among this cohort. It will be a measure of our society how well we look after our most vulnerable in this period. Ceann Comhairle, while we wait for the storm to come, it may seem too early to begin to think about a time when the sky is clear again. Right now, our citizens and our frontline workers in particular are living day to day, hour to hour, and coping to the best of their ability. And I must commend them. I'm very proud of how we have risen to this challenge as a nation. But there must also be a role for us as elected representatives to look beyond the surge and to how we rebuild an economy and a society from a sudden shock not seen before in our lifetimes. Our Uachtaráin has argued that the reaction to the COVID-19 crisis has made an unanswerable case for universal basic services, and I agree with him. I think it has also shown the merits and possibilities of a universal basic income, something that the pandemic unemployment payment comes very close to modelling. And I believe in responding to this tsunami, in listening to and in following the best scientific evidence and the advice of experts. We have shown how we might act to combat that more slow but ultimately more devastating inundation of climate change and biodiversity collapse that poses a more deadly threat to our planet than even this pandemic. Finally, Ceann Comhairle, I wish to address our responsibility as a House. If social protection is about the care of individuals in our society, it must also be about the protection of our society as a whole. And it's my firm belief that in a parliamentary democracy, the work of Parliament is paramount. The Dáil must sit, Ceann Comhairle. When my next-door neighbour is asked to go to her job as a carer each day, when my former student turns up to work at a shop counter each day, can I, as a Teachta Dáile, really sit at home and identify myself as a non-essential worker? The Dáil must sit. I acknowledge that today's sitting carries a risk of spreading the virus, not just for the deputies here in the chamber, but the kitchen staff, the ushers, all the ancillary staff who stand behind the work of this chamber. We are open to new ways of working, but against the backdrop of extraordinary legislation passed within the last month, with parliamentary questions suspended, with briefings for party spokespersons intermittent and dwindling, the need for parliamentary oversight and scrutiny has never been more acute. However it sits at Ceann Comhairle, however we use the new technologies available to us, the Dáil must sit. We've learned that in times of crisis, it's not the markets we turn to for help, but each other. Mara Dúras an seo Hannah, ag a deire here held, is ar scóil céile a Barn Nadina.